life after death. So we got through the 6 days. Then after the 6 days, came the realization that, you know, Jen's not, Jen is gone. And I'll never forget driving home from leaving the hospital. First off, probably the longest ride of my life. And I remember just looking around, being on the highway and seeing cars moving, seeing passengers and other cars laughing, people dancing, traffic, all things of what looked normal, but couldn't help to think everything around me didn't seem as normal. But it was a realization that I had at that moment that, life goes on. And albeit for me, or although for me, it was definitely felt like time had stood still, right? That car ride, you know, if anything said, hey, things go on, there is a semblance of normalcy that things will get back to, but it's going to look different. And I'm glad I was able to kind of reflect on that because, one of the tough things through this journey ensued, you know, was a mountain. Let me say it differently. It was a mountain that I had to face, which was letting the girls know that Jen had passed. And like it was tough. And I know for me, um, this is how it was when my dad passed. It was like a bad dream. From the moment that I woke up the day he passed until at some point the dream started to change a little bit, or at least you got used to it. Other than that, it changed, but life began to function. Um, but you will close your eyes and it's like a bad dream, and I'm like, gosh, I don't want this for my kids. And to have to explain to them how we had so much faith in all of the girls will come up here one day and they can talk about the 6 days and some of their journey, but they had faith that they heard mom was moving a little bit. There was a level of faith that they had, and then to now all of a sudden get to a point where I'm telling them she's gone. God, how do I explain that? Like these kids had faith, these kids believed, but yet they're still hearing me say, I praise you, God. And so it's like, God, just give me the strength the wisdom to talk to them and to tell them. But that moment coming in as they walk through the door was tough because as a parent, you want to protect your kids and you want to tell your kids everything is going to be all right. And Jen and I did all of that together. We talked to them through the good, we talked to them through the bad, we walked them through situations together. And so this being the first time I went out again, my mom was there, Jen's dad was there, Mama J was there, my brother, like so there was other people there to support, but I was delivering the message, and um it it was the first time that I'm like, this is the first of many times where this is now going to be the reality, where these conversations, these singular parenting conversations without the support of mom, this is now going to be the reality. Like it was very vivid to me at that moment when I was getting ready to talk to him. But I think the beauty of it is, I had my tribe right there with me, um, along the way. But having that conversation with them and telling them, and then having to hold them afterwards as they screamed, gotta be one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. Not just as a parent, just in general. It was tough. Um, I remember, the my two oldest acted the way you would expect um, a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old to respond with something like that. The baby was the baby. She doesn't know. She probably will never know or what she felt like in that moment. The one that was interesting was my 5 year old. Z was reacting off of everybody else. She knew, but you know, deflecting was the way she handled that. And I'll never forget the next day, um, was probably the only time since that I've ever really saw much emotion out of her. And, she cried and was crying for her mom. And at that moment, I held her, we talked, and her level of connection, of getting it. She said to me that day that I'm gonna write a letter, Daddy, for mommy. She missed mommy. So she's like, I'm gonna write a letter for mommy. And I'm gonna put it in my heart, and God is gonna grab it and give it to mommy. And that level of belief, that level of just faith and just getting it, I just I wept, I cried myself, and just thank God. Um, thank God you know, for being there for us at that moment. Um, but it was tough. It was tough nonetheless. And the realization that there's death and how we're going to live with death amidst this life of this new reality, not going to lie, was challenging, has been challenging. And, it's part of why I'm doing these YouTube videos to give you guys a glimpse of what that looks like as others go through grief. And, was for me, um, that first night and each night probably thereafter, um, was tough, initially, very tough. You don't want to close your eyes. As I talked about, dreams, man. You close your eyes, you see the person. You don't want to close your eyes, but sometimes you close your eyes and you start thinking about things that you can't control. And so sleep was not my friend, as I wasn't getting much sleep at all. Food, wasn't eating much, didn't have an appetite. And so I tried to eat, force myself to eat things sometimes, but just wasn't hungry. Or was, if I was eating once a day. And, everybody tried and, wanted me to eat and sleep. But the truth of the matter is I couldn't do it. It's the feeling that almost that I had was it felt it felt wrong for me, quite honestly, to continue life at times without Jen, right? The fact that she couldn't, but we could, didn't feel right. And so, not trying to say that I was trying to starve myself, not saying I was suicidal. It's just the thought of life continuing with somebody who had so much life that, we were just in church one day praising, watching movies on Netflix one night until the next, we're spending 6 days fighting for your life. The thought of that and just was tough for me to imagine that, like, at the snap of a finger, your fate can change at any moment. And so those early days, that's what life looked like after Jen's death. Like, it was tough, but um, I'm extremely, extremely thankful that I had a tribe, man. Listen, my gang is super, 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 super big, super supportive. And so, I think everybody needs a tribe. Everybody needs a support system. People that know you're not good and they're going to make sure they're around to make sure that you are good. And so, and I'm not just talking my siblings either. I'm talking family and friends. People showed up, people showed out. People prayed for us, and making sure that we be good. And like even, next session likely talk a bit more about the funeral and post some stuff from the funeral. But everything through that period was handled by family. And so I'm one of five. And so, everybody's married. And so there's 8 people there, all hands on deck. Plus, I've got a bunch of first cousins in the area. I've got some close friends in the area. I have some coworkers, Jen's coworkers, friends of the my children. Everybody just pitched in, quite honestly. And you know, at those moments is where I saw God's hand, where you see the love of God and displayed in the form of gestures by others through that time. Like I legit didn't have to worry about planning the funeral. I am a couple things they walked me through. It all was a blur. It's all blur at this point, but like they handled everything. And so the reason why I bring that up is because to process what life will look like beyond death, I needed that space to not have to worry about like some of the other things. I had to worry about being strong for the girls. I had to worry about in those first couple weeks making sure and how I show up for the girls, making sure that they're good. Um, and reality, those were probably the only decisions I really made, excuse me, in the beginning was taking care of the girls and making sure that, the girls were good. Shout out to my oldest, to E. Um, she plays basketball, and probably the best thing for me was to get back into a routine of something that I love doing. And I'll never forget that Monday, Jen passed on a Saturday. She had practice Monday night. And I remember talking to her and I said, you got practice tonight. And uh, I was I wasn't gonna coach that night, so I coached her team. And so I reached out to the director and said, hey, I'm not gonna be there, blah blah blah. So I talked to Dora and said, hey, you got practice tonight. You're gonna go. And she was like, yeah, I think I'll go. And I told her I wasn't coaching tonight and likely was gonna take off the season was what I was thinking. And her response to me was, well, if you're not coaching, I'm not playing. And you know, thought about it for a couple minutes and then said, well, I guess I'm I guess I'm gonna coach. And I'm glad she did that because, you know, 2 days out the week, 1 to 2 days out the week, that was the only period of time in those first couple weeks that felt normal to me. Coaching those girls, teaching those girls, not having to think of anything was probably the best outlet for me at that moment. Um, and I needed it. And I'm thankful that my daughter pushed me into that direction because it really gave me something to look forward to, something to plan for, something to get ready for, something it gave me an opportunity to compete. We were still playing in tournaments. Um, and it gave me an opportunity to compete and look forward to having these girls play and seeing my daughter compete and seeing her happy and amongst her friends. And so um, that was great. That was great. That was dope that I had the opportunity to do that because it was much needed, for sure. And so yeah, life after death looked different, but I think ultimately, as I said with that car ride, and the best way to kind of probably wrap this video up is thinking about the seasons. And as you think about the seasons, um, life after death is much like a season. And you're in a season to start, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're in a season to stay. There may be some changes that have occurred within the season, but I think the thing to look forward to that I constantly try to play back to myself was that this season is temporary. the way I'm feeling, um, not necessarily the way I'm feeling, excuse me, but there is an opportunity beyond this season for us to get through this situation, right? And um, for me, that's been very rewarding, knowing that there's something to look forward to beyond this. Knowing that, albeit there's a lot of uncertainty, um, even when it rains and when it pours, the sun comes back up. And so that hope that, there's a brighter tomorrow is the peace that keeps us going, right? It's a peace that keeps me going through the time. I think that's a piece that I've kind of uh, held on to through this period of time to be hopeful and to muster up, whatever bit of strength that I can. And I think the fact that I've got four kids is probably the best thing for me, because if it was just me, I don't know necessarily if I'd be able to muster that strength up as quickly as I think I've been. Those four kids, especially when I look at the life of Sarai, and when I look at her life, you can't help but to, I'm a believer that God doesn't fail, and God does all things for a reason. And he knew that he was bringing an infant into this world, and knew that her mother was going to pass a couple months after her being born. And so, I was just reading Jeremiah 1 um, with some fellas tonight, and it says that God, Jeremiah 1, um, verse 5, if I'm not mistaken, says that, God knew us before we were formed in the womb. So that means before we even thought of our parents, he knew us and set us, kind of apart, determine our future. And so a God who chose her is not going to bring her into this world without knowing that, like, she's going to be good. And so I know it's like it's ugly, it's uncomfortable, and it's tough right now. But the God who brought her into this world is going to be a God who's going to keep her. And so that's why I get the joy. That's where a lot of my joy comes from. And so I'm thankful um in knowing that. I'm thankful that I know that truth more than anything else. And so um life after death doesn't have to, you don't have to stay in that gloomy space. There's always some upside there. And so um appreciate y'all for listening. Um y'all have a blessed night.